process. There are 3 things that you need to know, as we've talked about already, before you start to write your message. Your audience, that's the target journal. Who are you writing the paper for? And then also your structure. Academic article structure has been the subject of other webinars in this series. If you would like us to send you recordings of presentations about article structure and how to write effectively the different sections of academic articles, we will be happy to at the end of this presentation. Build your mentorship group. Make sure you have peer reviewers in mind for the next time you make a submission. Make sure international colleagues are aware of you and aware of your work. And that's what we're going to come on and talk about in the next section of this presentation, maximizing the impact of your research. And certainly also do consider using preprint servers. That's another very effective way to get your research known about without necessarily committing yourself to a journal. Put your work onto a preprint server. Other colleagues around the world will see it. They may comment on it. You're protected, of course, by Creative Commons licenses. You're protected by copyright. There's nothing that anybody can do with your research. And journal editors check these preprint servers. Depending on your subject area, there'll be a preprint server in your area. I can send you also a list at the end of this presentation. Very good, effective way to just get your work out there. And journal editors, as I've said, will come to you and ask you, Gareth, would you like to consider submitting your paper to our journal? Takes away a lot of the pain from the publishing process. Let's talk then about effective writing and submission strategies to journals and how you can maximize your work's impact. This is more than just its academic impact. And as researchers working these days, we must be thinking much more broadly than, of course, which journal we are targeting our work to. We also have to be thinking about the economic and societal benefits of our research. Some of the images that you'll see on these slides come from Fast Track Impact, which is a company run by a friend of mine in Newcastle. You can check out that website as well, fasttrackimpact.com. You'll see that on some of the slides in a minute. But understanding academic impact, research impact, is really so important. And it's much more, as I've said, than just academic, just which journal you're publishing your research in, although nevertheless that's still important. And let's talk a little bit about how this is measured. Publications, of course, lie at the heart of our impact as researchers. We count papers, impact factors, R and H indices. Institutions count citations. You should be thinking how your work can translate into an impact, and how many people are actually going to cite your paper. How can you maximize your citations? Well, by having interesting, broad ideas around your research, by stepping back and thinking about your overarching message, right? And also making sure that your work is interesting. R indexes and H indexes we'll talk about in a minute, but your H index is your personal citation index as a researcher, measured against the number of papers that you've published personally. So, for example, somebody has an H index of 6, that means that they've published at least 6 papers that themselves have been cited at least 6 times. And this is obviously a distribution, so the maximum number of articles with that maximum number of citations. So someone with an H index of 30 has published 30 papers that have been cited at least 30 times. That's why the H index is considered to be a relatively effective metric for academic performance. You can look at people's numbers and you can learn something about their publication history. Of course, people argue about this. People argue about what this means. but this is nevertheless important. Coverage, of course, is a problem in some disciplines, and many people who work in the arts and humanities, social sciences, HSS subjects, humanities and social sciences, complain about the use of these metrics because, of course, as you can see here, citation indices for journals are based on coverage in the major publication databases like Web of Science and Scopus. And you can see here, of course, that as you drop down my list, you can see that the coverage, the percentage coverage in the Scopus database, the big Elsevier international citation database, falls off quite markedly. 74% of publications in science, health science, agriculture, food science, and veterinary medicine are covered in Scopus. But you can see why somebody working in the arts and humanities may be less happy about using an H-index to assess themselves as a researcher. Be aware that coverage is a problem in some disciplines. And thus, citation analysis, as you'll be aware as a researcher, is a way of measuring impact. An article or a publication by counting the number of times that that author, that article, or that publication has been cited by other works. And the R index is a raw metric for citations of a particular journal article. So that's the difference between an H index and an R index. And you should be using, as researchers, citation analysis tools. You'll be familiar, of course, with the three main ways in which people find academic research these days around the world, outside China, of course, Web of Science, Scopus, and our friend Google Scholar. These are the three main ways that researchers cite and search for citations online. If you don't have an ORCID ID to maximize your impact, your discoverability, your visibility as a researcher, well, then we recommend that you should get an ORCID ID, orcid.org. This is a not-for-profit organization that provides individual researcher identification numbers that you can then use to make sure that people know about you. It's also a very good way to distinguish people around the world. The Chinese last name Zhang, for example, there are millions of people with that last name. If you search for Zhang papers on Web of Science, you'll get millions of them. Which is which? Same with the English name Smith, for example. If these researchers have ORCID identification numbers, then it's much easier for you to identify Alan Smith or John Smith in your research area. And indeed, you'll find more and more journals are requiring authors now to have these IDs before they make submissions. Why? Your outputs, your impact can be tied back to you, the individual researcher, very, very easily. Other people get to know about you. And by the way, this is a free way for you to build your academic CV. Just sign up for one. It searches Web of Science, it searches Scopus, it searches Google Scholar, it assembles your publication list for you. So you don't have to spend the time formatting and discovering and working on that academic CV. So the point I'm making is that we measure academic impact. Here's a citation impact field-weighted plot. You can see that this is becoming more and more important as time goes on. But don't forget that academic impact is just half the story for us as researchers. We also need to demonstrate that our research is making a difference to the lives of ordinary people. That's socio-economic impact that we talked about a little bit ago. So design, represent, engage, make sure your work is having that early impact, and then reflect and sustain and measure what difference your work is making. A good example of how you can do this is an example using tobacco molecular genetics. Now, you could, if you were researching tobacco molecular genetics, you could just write papers on that particular quite narrow subject area that only other researchers working in that particular field, tobacco, molecular genetics, let's say, would read and would care about. Or you can take another pathway to impact with your research and with your research questions and broaden the way that you look at your research hypotheses and talk about other things, talk about wider public health benefits. In this particular example, everybody cares about the health benefits, lack of